The schoolteacher rides into town, but her secret makes the sheriff tremble. The dust cloud appeared first on the eastern horizon, a golden smudge against the endless blue of morning sky. Sheriff Caleb Morrison squinted from the porch of his office, coffee growing cold in his weathered hands as he watched the lone rider approach Millbrook Ridge. Something about the figure's posture, straight-backed and purposeful, made his chest tighten with an inexplicable unease. The woman who dismounted near the schoolhouse wore a simple grey dress, travel-worn but carefully mended. Her auburn hair was pinned beneath a modest bonnet, and when she turned toward the gathered townspeople, her green eyes held a quiet intensity that made Caleb's breath catch. She moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to command, yet there was something guarded in her bearing, like a door held firmly shut against prying eyes. "Miss Eleanor Whitfield," she introduced herself to Mayor Patterson, her voice clear and educated. "I've come to take the teaching position." Caleb found himself stepping closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. When their eyes met across the dusty street, he saw her stiffen almost imperceptibly, her hand moving to clutch the small leather satchel at her side. The gesture was so brief, he might have imagined it, but the sheriff's instincts, honed by years of reading danger in men's faces, told him otherwise. The first weeks passed quietly. Eleanor Whitfield proved herself a capable teacher, her lessons engaging the dozen children of Millbrook Ridge with stories of distant places and mathematical puzzles that challenged their frontier minds. She boarded at Mrs. Henley's boarding house, keeping to herself in the evenings, declining invitations to social gatherings with polite but firm refusals. Caleb watched her from afar, noting how she always positioned herself near doorways, how her eyes swept the room before she entered anywhere, how she carried herself like someone prepared to run. When he tried to engage her in conversation after church services, she responded with careful courtesy that revealed nothing of herself. "Fine weather we're having," he ventured one Sunday morning. "Indeed, Sheriff Morrison, the children appreciate being able to take their lessons outdoors. Please, call me Caleb. We're not much for formality here." Her smile was pleasant but distant. "I prefer to maintain proper boundaries, Sheriff. It serves everyone better." He sensed walls behind her words, barriers built from experience he couldn't fathom. Yet something in her manner spoke of strength rather than weakness, of deliberate choice rather than timidity. The first crack in Eleanor's carefully maintained facade came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Caleb was making his rounds when he heard the commotion from the schoolyard. Young Jamie Crawford had taken a bad fall from the oak tree behind the schoolhouse, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. The other children were crying, frozen with fear. But Eleanor Whitfield moved with startling efficiency. She knelt beside the boy, her hands gentle but sure as she examined the injury. "Sarah, run fetch Dr. Brennan," she instructed the oldest girl. "Tell him we need splinting materials. Tommy, help me gather straight branches from beneath the oak." Caleb arrived as she was fashioning a makeshift splint with strips torn from her petticoat. Her movements were precise, practiced, those of someone who had treated serious injuries before. "Where did you learn field medicine?" he asked quietly as they waited for the doctor. Eleanor's hands stilled for just a moment. "A woman on the frontier learns many things out of necessity, Sheriff." But Caleb had seen army medics work, and her technique went far beyond frontier necessity. When Dr. Brennan arrived and examined her work, he nodded with professional approval. "Excellent job, Miss Whitfield. You may have saved the boy's leg." That evening, Caleb found himself walking past Mrs. Henley's boarding house more than once. Light glowed in Eleanor's second-floor window until well past midnight, and he wondered what kept her wakeful when the rest of the town slept peacefully. October brought the first serious trouble. Word spread that the Garrett gang had been spotted 2 towns over, robbing banks and stagecoaches with increasing boldness. Caleb organized patrols and warned the townspeople to be vigilant, but he noticed Eleanor's reaction to the news was different from the others. Where they showed fear or concern, she displayed something closer to recognition, as if she were placing pieces of a familiar puzzle. The gang struck on a Friday afternoon, hitting the bank, just as Caleb was on the far side of town investigating a reported cattle theft. By the time he heard the gunshots and raced back, 4 men had cleaned out the vault and were thundering out of town toward the canyon country. Eleanor Whitfield stood in the street outside the schoolhouse, her students clustered behind her, watching the dust cloud disappear. But Caleb noticed she wasn't looking at the retreating riders. Her gaze was fixed on the bank, and her expression held a mixture of calculation and something that looked almost like regret. "Did you see them clearly?" he asked her. 4 men, well-mounted, well-armed. They knew exactly what they were doing. Her answer was precise, observational, again revealing more knowledge than a schoolteacher should possess. That night, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor knew more than she was saying. He found himself thinking about the way she'd assessed the robbery scene, the professional detachment in her voice when describing the bandits. The answer came to him in fragments over the following weeks. A letter addressed to E.D. that Eleanor collected from the post office with hands that trembled slightly. The way she unconsciously checked the chambers of his revolver when he set it down while fixing a broken window at the school. Her detailed knowledge of horses and riding gear when helping him examine tracks left by cattle thieves. The pieces crystallized on a cold November morning when a stranger rode into town asking questions. He was a thin man with pale eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He introduced himself to Caleb as Marshall Riley from Denver. "I'm tracking someone," Riley explained in Caleb's office. "A woman who's been running for 2 years now. Goes by different names, but she's got distinctive auburn hair and green eyes. About 5'4", educated manner." "Ring any bells?" Caleb felt his world shift slightly. What she wanted for? Bank robbery, part of a gang that hit 6 banks across Colorado and Wyoming. She was the inside person, gained employment at the banks, learned their routines, then passed information to her partners. Riley pulled out a wanted poster. Eleanor Dawson, also known as Ellie Whitman, Ellen Davis, and half a dozen other aliases. The face on the poster was unmistakably Eleanor Whitfield, though the eyes held a hardness that was absent from the woman teaching his town's children. "There's a $1,000 reward," Riley continued, "but I'm more interested in catching the rest of her gang. Word is they're working this territory now." Caleb stared at the poster, his mind reeling. "What makes you think she's here?" "Process of elimination. She's smart, careful, always picks small towns, always takes respectable positions. Teaching or clerking, something that gives her access to community information." Riley leaned forward. "She's here, Sheriff. I can feel it." That evening, Caleb walked the streets of Millbrook Ridge with new eyes. Every interaction with Eleanor took on different meaning. Her refusal to socialize wasn't shyness, but caution. Her knowledge of medicine and horses wasn't frontier pragmatism, but criminal experience. Her way of always knowing who entered a room wasn't feminine intuition, but survival instinct. Yet, as he thought about the woman he'd observed for months, doubt crept in. The Eleanor he knew was gentle with children, patient with their struggles, genuinely concerned for their welfare. She'd worked tirelessly to improve the school, using her own money to buy supplies when the town's budget ran short. The Eleanor Dawson on the wanted poster seemed like a different person entirely. The confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon. Caleb found Eleanor sitting alone in the schoolhouse, grading papers by the light of the western window. The autumn sun turned her hair to burnished copper and cast her profile in sharp relief. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She looked up, and in that instant, he saw her read the knowledge in his face. Her shoulders squared, but she didn't run. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," she said with quiet resignation. "You're better at your job than most." "Is it true? The banks, the robberies?" Eleanor set down her pen and folded her hands in her lap. "Yes, all of it." Why? The simple question seemed to break something inside her. She was quiet for so long that Caleb thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My younger brother Marcus got in debt to some very dangerous men, gambling debts that kept growing no matter what he paid. They threatened to kill him if he couldn't come up with $5,000. She stared out the window at the empty street. I was working as a bank clerk in Denver. Marcus knew people who robbed banks. It started as just one job, enough to save his life. But it didn't stop there. No. The men Marcus owed money to decided they liked having a bank insider. They made it clear what would happen to him if I refused to keep helping. Her laugh held no humor. I told myself I was saving my brother's life. The truth is, after the first few jobs, I was just trying to save my own. Where is Marcus now? Dead. Shot in a saloon fight in Kansas 6 months ago. All those banks, all those people's money stolen, and he died anyway over a card game. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. I've been running ever since, trying to figure out how to make amends. Caleb sat heavily in one of the small student desks. Marshall Riley is here. He knows who you are. Eleanor nodded. I saw him ride in this morning. I've been expecting someone like him for months. The Garrett gang that hit our bank. My former partners. They've been following me, trying to convince me to rejoin them. I've refused, but they won't give up easily. She met his eyes directly. I swear to you, Caleb, I had nothing to do with that robbery. I'm trying to build a different life. The use of his first name struck him like a physical blow. In that moment, the careful distance she'd maintained crumbled, and he saw the woman beneath the carefully constructed mask, frightened, ashamed, but determined to be better than her past. What's your real name? Eleanor. That part was always true. Eleanor Catherine Dawson. If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with friends who love Old West stories. The next few days passed in tense quiet. Marshall Riley continued his investigation, questioning townspeople about their new schoolteacher. Caleb watched Eleanor teach her classes with the same dedication as always, knowing each day might be her last in Millbrook Ridge. On Wednesday evening, the situation exploded. The Garrett gang rode into town at sunset, 4 hard men with nothing left to lose. Caleb recognized their leader from Eleanor's description, a scarred man named Wade Garrett, who'd been Marcus Dawson's closest friend. They took positions around the schoolhouse where Eleanor was working late, trapping her inside. Caleb saw the situation developing and sent his deputy to rouse the townspeople while he positioned himself across the street. "Eleanor!" Wade called out. "Time to stop playing schoolmarm and come back to work." Her voice carried clearly through the open window. "I told you, Wade, I'm done with that life. Your brother wouldn't want you abandoning family business." "My brother's dead because of that business." Wade's laugh was ugly. "Then maybe it's time you joined him." Caleb had heard enough. He stepped into the street, rifle ready. "That's far enough, gentlemen." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. 4 outlaws, 1 sheriff, and a woman caught between her past and her future. The townspeople gathered at safe distances, watching the drama unfold. Then Eleanor Whitfield did something that surprised everyone. She walked out of the schoolhouse, hands empty and visible. "Let's end this, Wade. Just you and me." "Eleanor!" "No," Caleb called. But she ignored him. "I know where you hid the money from the Colorado jobs," she said to Wade. "The cash Marcus told you about before he died. It's worth more than whatever you think you'll get from continuing these robberies." Wade's eyes sharpened with greed. "You're lying." $15,000 buried near the old Mackenzie mine. Marcus drew me a map before he left Denver. "I'll trade you the location for my freedom." It was a desperate gamble, and Caleb could see Wade weighing it. The outlaw leader dismounted, keeping his gun trained on Eleanor. "Show me this map." Eleanor reached slowly into her satchel, the same leather bag she'd clutched so protectively when she first arrived in town. but instead of a map, she drew out a small derringer. "The map's in my head, Wade, and it dies with me if you don't let these people be." The Mexican standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Wade laughed and raised his gun. Caleb's rifle cracked and Wade spun sideways. Eleanor's derringer barked twice, dropping another outlaw. The remaining 2 gang members found themselves facing not just the sheriff, but half the town, armed and angry. The fight was over in minutes. Wade Garrett lay dying in the dust, and his surviving partners sat with their hands bound behind their backs. Marshal Riley emerged from behind the general store, smoking gun in hand. "Well, Miss Dawson," Riley said conversationally, "that was quite a show." Eleanor stood straight, despite the blood running down her arm from a graze. "I suppose you'll be taking me back to Denver now." "Actually, I don't think so." Riley holstered his weapon. "See, my job was to catch the Garrett gang. Far as I can tell, they're all accounted for. Wade and his boys were the real problem. The inside person who helped them was just another victim, coerced into cooperation." Caleb stared at the marshal. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Eleanor Dawson died with her brother in Kansas. This here's Miss Eleanor Whitfield, schoolteacher of Millbrook Ridge. Fine, upstanding citizen who just helped me apprehend some dangerous criminals." Riley tipped his hat to Eleanor. "Assuming, of course, that Miss Whitfield intends to remain a law-abiding member of this community." Eleanor's voice was thick with unshed tears. "Yes, sir, I do." "Then I believe my work here is done." Riley mounted his horse and gathered the reins. "Sheriff Morrison, I'll be taking these surviving outlaws back to Denver. The territorial judge will want to question them about other robberies." As Riley rode away with his prisoners, the townspeople began to disperse, talking excitedly about the shootout they'd witnessed. Dr. Brennan fussed over Eleanor's wounded arm, while Mrs. Henley scolded her for taking such risks. Caleb waited until they were alone to approach her. Eleanor sat on the schoolhouse steps, her face pale but determined in the lamplight. "Why didn't you tell me about the derringer?" he asked. "Because you're an honest man, Caleb. If you'd known I was armed, you'd have felt obligated to disarm me. I needed that gun in case this day came. And the money Wade mentioned, real enough? Marcus did tell me where some of their early proceeds were hidden. I'll see that it gets returned to the banks it came from." Caleb sat beside her on the wooden steps. The evening air carried the scent of wood smoke and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the darkness. "So what happens now?" he asked. "I suppose that depends on whether Millbrook Ridge still wants a schoolteacher with a questionable past." "The way I see it," Caleb said carefully, "Eleanor Dawson made some bad choices trying to save someone she loved. Eleanor Whitfield has been nothing but an asset to this community. Far as I'm concerned, they're 2 different people." "And you? Can you see past what I was?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who'd saved Jamie Crawford's leg, who'd spent her own money on school supplies, who'd risked her life to protect the town from her former associates. "Eleanor," he said finally, "I've been wondering something." "What's that?" "Would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow evening? Nothing fancy, just Mrs. Patterson's Sunday roast. I promise to call you Miss Whitfield in public if it makes you more comfortable." Her smile was the first truly unguarded expression he'd seen from her. "I'd like that very much, but you can call me Eleanor. I think I'm finally ready to stop hiding." 6 months later, Eleanor Catherine Whitfield married Sheriff Caleb Morrison in the same schoolhouse where she'd faced down her past. She wore her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in her leather satchel all these years, and altered to fit by the women of Millbrook Ridge, who'd embraced her completely once they learned her story. The children she taught served as attendants, their faces bright with joy for their beloved teacher. As they exchanged vows in the golden light of late afternoon, Eleanor thought about the long road that had brought her to this moment. The guilt over her crimes would never completely leave her, but she'd found something she'd never expected in this dusty frontier town: redemption, forgiveness, and a love strong enough to build a future upon. The money from the hidden cash had indeed been returned to the banks Wade's gang had robbed. Eleanor's testimony helped authorities track down stolen funds from other robberies, returning thousands of dollars to grateful communities. She'd insisted on testifying under her real name, accepting responsibility for her part in the crimes, even though it could have meant prison. But the territorial judge, influenced by her cooperation and the testimony of Millbrook Ridge's citizens, sentenced her to community service, specifically continuing to teach school for 5 years while making restitution from her salary. It was a punishment that felt more like a blessing. The wedding celebration lasted until well past midnight, with music and dancing in the schoolyard. As Eleanor and Caleb finally walked home together under a canopy of stars, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked as they paused at their front gate. "Giving up the excitement of your old life for small-town respectability?" Eleanor looked back at the schoolhouse where tomorrow she would again stand before her students, helping shape young minds and futures. Then she looked at the man beside her, steady, kind, and brave enough to love a woman with a criminal past. "Never," she said firmly. "This is the life I was meant to live. It just took me a while to find my way to it." As they entered their home together, Eleanor silently thanked whatever forces had guided a desperate woman fleeing her past to this place where she'd found her future. Sometimes the most unlikely paths led to the most precious destinations. Our stories here on the channel are fictional works created to inspire and entertain, and are not intended to offend anyone. If you enjoyed this tale of redemption and second chances in the Old West, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with others who love these classic frontier stories. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.